On the planet of Selvaris, beauty was law. It was measured in the shimmer of skin and the sweetness of scent. The Selvarian people floated through glass cities like living perfumes, their luminous bodies glowing under twin suns. Each step they took left trails of blossoms. Each breath filled the air with notes of rain-kissed petals and soft fruit winds. But not lilura. She was born beneath a storm, her mother screaming not just from pain but from shame. When the elders leaned in to bless the child, they recoiled. Her skin was not smooth crystal but rough, bark-toned, veined with deep green swirls like tree roots. Her scent was not of flowers or spice, it was wild and earthy, thick with soil and sun-warmed moss. A scent of something alive and untamed. To the Selvarians, it was a sign of corruption. To Lilura, it was simply the truth of her body. Growing up, she learned to keep her eyes low. Alien men crossed the walkways to avoid her. Children whispered, calling her dirt-skin, rot-born. Once, a boy ran from her screaming that her smell made his nose burn. Even her mother kept her distance, eyes hollow with disappointment. The elders, called lilura, contaminated, said the roots in her skin were a curse passed down from some forgotten impurity. They made her stand at the edge of gatherings, never touching food first, never speaking unless called. She obeyed. What else could she do? But the wildwoods beyond the city had no rules, no mirrors, no elders. Lilura discovered them as a child when she ran sobbing into the trees, her palms bleeding from shattered crystal thrown at her feet. There, the ground was soft and damp. Birds with violet wings sang without judgment. The air was thick with the very scent she carried: earth, bark, sap, stone. She wept into the moss, and the moss wept back. And in time, the forest became her only refuge. As the years passed, Lilura learned to speak in silence. She could mimic bird calls, coax dew from some stubborn plants, and walk barefoot without disturbing the soil. Her fingers grew calloused from carving shelter out of vines and hollowed bark. She stitched her garments from leaves that never wilted and kept her hair braided with thin strands of living root. She lived outside the crystal cities, far from whispers and shame, watched only by the stars and the wind. Then, one evening, stars blinked wrong. Lilura had been foraging near the cliffline where sky met forest. The air was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no bugs, and then light. A streak across the heavens, burning gold, splitting the twilight in two. It wasn't like the gentle comets she'd seen before. This was sharp, urgent, bleeding flame, a crash, not far. Her heart skipped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Her people would never go near something like that. Too dirty, too unknown. But Lilura was not like her people. She had never been welcome in their palaces of glass. She belonged to the woods, to what was real, to what smelled of truth. And something in that crash called to her not fear, but purpose. Barefoot and breathless, she began to run. The smoke rose in curls above the canopy, black against the violet sky, staining the twilight like a wound. Lilura stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind pulling at her braids. Her eyes locked on the place where the fire had crashed into the world. Trees still groaned in pain from the impact, their roots scorched, their branches torn like shattered arms. Below, nestled in a crater of broken earth and burning moss, was the thing. It didn't belong. Nothing of Selvaris was made of such hard metal, such unnatural shape. No vine grew on its surface. No crystal shimmered on its hull. It sat in the crater like a scar, and yet she felt drawn to it. For hours she watched, waiting for movement, for danger. None came. Only strange noises, distant hums, sharp hisses, and the occasional flicker of blue light from within. The forest around it was restless. Birds refused to land. The insects that usually hummed in the branches were silent. Even the trees leaned away as if confused or afraid. Lilura descended as dusk fell fully, moving as she always did, silent, sure, barefoot across the broken terrain. The air grew thick with the smell of burned bark and scorched stone, but beneath that something else, something faint and unfamiliar. Not floral, not earthy. It reminded her of lightning before a storm. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with wonder. She crouched beside the crater's edge. The thing had a wound, part of it torn open from the crash. The scent was stronger here. Inside the broken vessel, lights pulsed faintly. Shapes moved behind dark panels. And then, a sound. Not machine, not wind. A voice. Groaning. Lilura single quotes S. Breath caught in her throat. Something inside it was alive. Without thinking. She climbed down. The ship's surface was warm in places, cold in others, strange symbols etched along its skin. She touched one panel, and it pulsed red beneath her fingertips. She flinched. Then it hissed. Steam or gas vented from the side. And a hatch began to open with a slow grind. She stepped back, heart hammering, unsure what to expect. But nothing prepared her for what she saw. He stumbled out, collapsing to one knee. Tall, broad, his body covered in strange fabric, part of it torn and burned. His skin was darker than any, Selvaris bronzed, warm-toned. His face was covered in scrapes and sweat. Blood trickled from his forehead. And yet, even wounded, there was strength in the way he moved, like a wild animal too stubborn to fall. He looked up at her, blinking through pain, his deep brown eyes. Locking with hers, she braced herself for the flinch, for the recoil, for the wrinkled nose and turned back. Instead, he smiled, not a forced smile, not a cruel one. It was soft, surprised, almost grateful. Didn't think anyone lived out here, he said, voice raspy but steady. Hell of a landing, she stared, confused. He was speaking something old, something not used in the cities anymore, but she understood just enough to hear what he meant. His eyes searched her face. He didn't look away, didn't stare at her skin like it was wrong, didn't twitch at her scent. Instead, his gaze softened. You're real, he whispered. I thought I was seeing things. Lilura didn't speak. Her mouth wouldn't move. This had never happened. No one had ever looked at her this way. Not with disgust, not with pity, but with recognition. He reached toward his belt, winced, and nearly collapsed again. She moved quickly, catching him before he hit the ground. He was heavy, warm, alive. Who are you? She asked, voice trembling. He smiled again, weak but sure. Nolan, he said. Commander Nolan Trace. Earth Fleet. Earth. That word. It struck something in her. She had heard it once, in forbidden stories whispered beneath council towers. Humans. Forbiddens. Inferior. Unclean. And yet, as he rested in her arms, bleeding and breathing, she felt no fear. She should have left. Should have called the watchers. Should have run. But something in her chest cracked open instead. Something old. Something aching. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. And now he was hers to protect. Far above, the stars blinked silently, and the smoke rose higher, curling into the night like a secret not meant to stay hidden. Lilura had never brought anyone into the grove before. The grove was hers. It was sacred. Hidden beneath the roots of an elder tree so old its trunk had swallowed stones and stars alike. Bioluminescent vines draped from the high branches like weeping light. The air was damp with the scent of moss and glowing fungi. She had always come here alone when the pain became too loud, when the whispers followed her into sleep. The grove was silence, peace, belonging, and now it held Allah. Stranger. Nolan lay against the base of the great root, breathing heavy but alive. His uniform was torn where the crystal shards had sliced him during the crash, and blood-rich red foreign stained his sleeve. Lilura had crushed moonfruit to cleanse the wound and wrapped it in leaf bands soaked in silver sap. He hadn't flinched when she touched him. Not once, but she had. Her fingers trembled not from fear but from confusion. How could someone look at her and not see something broken? How could he smile, even when bleeding, even when surrounded by the wilds her people feared? He had fallen asleep hours ago, his body exhausted. She sat by the fire now, watching him, listening to the strange words he had murmured before slipping into dreams. I thought this planet was uninhabited. He'd said uninhabited, as if her people, her existence, didn't count. Perhaps to the stars. She didn't. When he stirred, she didn't speak, just watched. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking at the canopy glowing above them. And then he looked at her. You're still here, he said softly. She tilted her head. You expected me to leave? His smile was tired. Most do. They sat in silence for a long time. He studied the world around him, the fire, the leaves, the soft buzz of distant night wings. She studied him. Your ship, she said finally. Can it fly? He shook his head. Not yet. Main core's fried, but I'll fix it. And then? Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened with every word. He didn't answer at first. Just looked at her, really looked. I don't know, he admitted. Depends what I find here. Lilura wanted to ask what he saw when he looked at her, not the vines in her hair or the scars on her arms, not the scent that made her kin wrinkle their faces in disgust. But what he really saw. She didn't ask. She stood instead and walked toward a low shelf of stone. From a pouch woven of reed, she pulled a small glowing root and crushed it into a paste. She brought it to him, offering it in both hands. For the fever, she said. He took it carefully. Thank you. When his fingers touched hers, she didn't flinch. That night, they talked more. He told her of Earth, of crowded cities where no one looked like the next, of people who fought and failed and still tried again, of oceans so deep they swallowed ships whole, of music, of dancing, of a place where beauty had no single form. She listened with wide eyes. Such places seemed impossible. Yet here he was, proof they existed. In return, she told him of Selvaris, of the glass towers, of the scented caste system, of how every child was judged by their skin's shimmer and breath's fragrance before they could even walk. How she was named a mistake before she had spoken her first word. His face darkened at that. They're fools, he said. If they can't see you. He trailed off, but she felt the words he didn't say that night. As the fire dimmed and Nolan slept once more, Lilura stepped out of the grove. She climbed the rise above the forest, looking toward the distant lights of her people's city. They were searching now. She had seen the scout gliders flash across the treetops, scanning for unauthorized movement. They knew something had fallen. They would come. Not to rescue, but to destroy. Her people feared outsiders. And if they saw her with one sharing breath, sharing silence, they would see it as betrayal. She looked back toward the grove. Nolan shifted in his sleep, brow furrowed, chest rising with effort. She didn't know why, but the thought of losing him burned more than anything she had ever known. Not again. Not this time. She turned away from the city lights and stepped back into the shadows that would soon become war. The gliders came at dawn. 3 of them, silent and sharp like blades of light. They drifted above the treetops, their silver hulls reflecting the rising sun, too clean, too cold for the forest below. Lilura saw them before they saw her. She pressed herself into the hollow of an old tree, heart pounding so loud she was sure the machines could hear. Their sensors swept across the canopy, beams of pale energy searching for heat, for movement, for anything that didn't belong. Nolan didn't. No. He was still sleeping beneath the great root, exhausted from fever and pain. He had repaired a power coil last night with trembling fingers and a wrench made of scavenged crystal. He had bled from his palm but kept working, muttering to himself that if he could just get the core to stabilize, he might be able to lift off in a week. Maybe less. He didn't know that a week was a fantasy. They didn't have days. They had hours. Lilura waited until the gliders passed, their engines humming like insects in her ears. Then she ran, fast and silent. Moss muffled her footsteps as she weaved through underbrush, vines whispering against her arms as she passed. When she reached the grove, Nolan was awake, kneeling by the fire, stirring something in a cup she had made him. His eyes lit up when he saw her, but that smile faded when he saw her face. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. She handed him the small pouch tied around her waist. Moss root, bone ash, a sliver of tree fire, all the things he might need to survive if she didn't make it back. "They're coming," she said. Finally. Nolan stiffened. "Your people?" She nodded. He stood quickly, grimacing as he grabbed his side. "Then we need to go. Now." She touched his arm. "You can't run yet. You're still weak." "Doesn't matter," he snapped. "If they find me here, they won't find you. They'll find us, and that's worse." Nolan looked at her, then really looked. "What happens if they do?" Lilura didn't blink. "They'll kill you." He exhaled slowly, trying to push the weight of that truth out of his chest. "And you?" She hesitated. "They won't need to. I'll already be dead to them." They stared at each other for a long burning moment. Then Nolan said, "We fight." She shook her head. "We hide, just for now." But it was already too late. A rustle behind the trees, too rhythmic to be an animal. A faint glow from between the branches. Crystal armor. Lilura grabbed Nolan's wrist. "Run." They didn't make it far. The grove exploded with light. Vines curled back in pain. The trees themselves recoiled as three armored figures stepped through the underbrush, weapons raised, faces masked behind mirrored helms. The lead one stepped forward, tall, his voice amplified by the mask. "Contaminant Lilura of House No Name. You have committed genetic treason. Step away from the off-worlder." Nolan stepped in front of her. "She hasn't done anything," he said. "I'm the one who crashed here." "Silence," the soldier snapped. "Your presence violates planetary quarantine law. Your blood is unclean." "And yours is empty," Lilura growled, stepping beside Nolan. The soldier hesitated. "You would defend it? Stand beside this thing?" Lilura raised her chin. He looked at me without fear, without shame, without disgust. "None of you ever did." A sudden hum. The lead soldier's gauntlet lit up. A beam charged in his palm. "Then you will die with it." Before he could fire, the ground trembled. Roots surged upward. The forest answered her anger. Vines shot from mine. The earth wrapping around the soldiers' legs, yanking them off their feet. The fire pit exploded into a halo of burning ash as moss turned to flame. Birds screeched overhead. The trees leaned inward, forming a ring around the grove, their limbs crackling with ancient magic. Lilura's voice rose not in fear, but in song. Not a melody of sorrow, but a battle cry, the wildblood song. Nolan staggered back, eyes wide as Lilura glowed with an emerald light, her veins pulsing like lightning through bark-toned skin. Her hands raised, commanding the earth like a conductor. The soldier screamed as roots coiled tighter, snapping metal and bone. One tried to retreat, but the ground beneath him opened wide and swallowed him whole. Then silence. Smoke curled into the sky once more. Nolan stepped forward, breathless. "What was that?" Lilura stood shaking, sweat dripping from her brow, light fading from her skin. "It's what they buried," she said. "What they feared." She collapsed. He caught her. The forest watched. And far away, the council of Selvaris felt the tremor of something they had long tried to forget, something awakening. The forest was no longer quiet, even in the hours after the fight. After the soldiers had been swallowed by earth and vine, a tension lingered like a storm waiting to return. The birds had not come back. The breeze no longer whistled between leaves. It was as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Nolan carried Lilura back into the grove, her body limp in his arms, her skin cold with exhaustion. Whatever force she had summoned, whatever ancient song had burned through her veins, had drained her. She had spoken no word since the vines retreated. Only her heartbeat, faint but steady, told him she was still with him. He laid her down beneath the elder root, brushing a hand across her brow. Her skin pulsed faintly, like embers in fading firelight. Her lips moved, soundless. He didn't know what to do. Earth medicine wasn't built for this, for wildblood songs or forest-bonded bodies. Everything he had in his medkit was useless too. Clinical, too cold, so he did what she once did for him. He crushed a fruit she had shown him, poured its liquid over a cloth, and pressed it gently to her forehead. He sat beside her in silence, listening to the forest groan and shift around them like an old beast disturbed. The fire had long died when she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, the gold in them dimmed but still burning. "You stayed," she whispered. He leaned closer, relieved. "Of course I did." She blinked, her fingers twitching in the moss. "I used too much," she said. "The forest gave me power, but it's not free. You saved us." "I delayed them," she corrected, her voice barely above the crackling of the old wood. "They'll send more, stronger, with binding crystals and soul-draining lances. They'll come not to warn me, but to erase me." Nolan clenched his jaw. "Then we don't stay here. We finish the ship. We leave. Together." She looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "You would leave your people? Your world?" He nodded without hesitation. "I didn't find what I was sent for. I found something better." She closed her eyes. Her breath grew steadier. "Then there's something you need to see," she said, slowly rising. They walked deep into the forest, past places even she rarely stepped. The ground grew denser, darker, roots curling like veins across the earth. The air was thick with memory, old memory. The trees no longer watched, they remembered. They reached the mouth of a cave half swallowed by time. It glowed faintly from within. "This is the heart root," she whispered. "The place the council sealed when the wildblood line was declared extinct. They feared it, feared what we could become. Feared we'd turn the world inside out. And—" "You're the last," Nolan said. She nodded. Inside the cave, the walls pulsed with slow light. Etched into the stone were images, stories, and glowing bark. A woman with root-veined skin calling storms. A man singing rivers into existence. Children walking into trees and returning as birds. Wild bloods. All lost. They were protectors once. She said, "But then the council came, turned beauty into law, turned love into contracts, turned scent into status." She stopped before a stone altar. Her hand hovered above it. "But power like this never dies," she whispered. With a single touch, the altar lit up. The cave rumbled. Roots withdrew from the stone as if waking from a long sleep. And in the heart of it all, pulsing like a star, was a living crystal, not of the cities, but of the forest. Green, warm, humming with raw energy. "What is it?" Nolan asked. "A seed," she said, "of the old world. The one before walls and castes. It was meant to choose a bearer. But none ever came." The crystal pulsed as she approached. Her scent, once rejected, matched it perfectly. The glow intensified, and then the crystal cracked open like a blooming flower. Inside was a smaller shard, swirling with green and gold, suspended in sap. Lilura took it into her palm. It did not burn. It sang. With this, I can awaken the earth below your ship. Give it the energy it needs to fly. You'd give it away? No, she said. I'd give it to us. Nolan stared at her. You don't need to do this. I do, she replied, not to escape, but to live, really live. As they returned to the ship, she pressed the shard into the hull's underframe near where metal met root. The earth itself shifted in response, vines crawling up the ship, not consuming but bonding. When Nolan activated the engine core that night, the lights flickered brighter than before. The hum was different, wilder, deeper, like something alive had entered the bones of the ship. What did you just turn this thing into? He asked in awe. A home, she said, but far above them, in the ivory towers of Selvaris, the High Council watched the tremor ripple through their crystal maps. The outcast had awakened the seed, and worse. She was not alone. The next purge would not be silent. The sky cracked open. Light split through the clouds like jagged spears, and for a moment it looked as if the heavens themselves were being torn apart. But it wasn't the sky that was breaking. It was the silence before war. They had found her. Lilura knew it the moment the birds vanished again, the trees stiffening with a soundless shudder. The forest always warned her, even when it couldn't speak. She stood on the rise above the grove, wind slicing through her hair, vines swaying at her. Sighed. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but from the fury building in her chest. Nolan was at the ship, stabilizing the systems. The wildblood shard had done more than power it had awakened it. His human systems merged with Selvarian root tech, and the hull now pulsed faintly with life. Vines twisted around the metal not as parasites but as armor, old bark reinforcing. The weak spots, tendrils fused into the propulsion grid. The ship was no longer just a machine. It was a promise. They had hours. Maybe less. The High Council didn't send patrols this time. They sent cleansers. Lilura saw them before she heard. Them. They descended in silence, 9 armored figures, cloaked in mirrored crystal, faces hidden behind masks of judgment. They did not land in the forest. They landed on it, burning their way down in beams of heat, leaving blackened rings where nothing would grow again. They carried no banners. Only a decree, projected into the air by a pale drone that hovered above the lid cleanser. By the order of the Selvarian High Council, the impure blood of lilura shall be erased from history. The off-world contaminant will be disintegrated. No traces shall remain. Nolan stepped beside her, blaster in hand, jaw clenched. They don't negotiate, she said. Good, he replied. Neither do I. She looked at him, really looked. Dirt stained his cheek, a cut across his brow still raw. He had every reason to run. He had no claim to this war, and yet he stood beside her like it was his home burning too. We can still leave, she whispered. Not without you, he said. And not with them behind us. Lilura stepped forward, her bare feet pressing into the moss. Her eyes glowed softly, the veins in her arms pulsing with the rhythm of the forest. Behind her, the trees groaned and leaned forward like an army waking from centuries of slumber. They want to erase me, she said. Then let them try. The battle began with silence. The first cleanser fired a lance of pure crystal light. The forest responded with rage. Roots burst from the ground, shattering the beam emitter. Vines snapped forward like whips, pulling one cleanser backward into the dark. A shriek, then silence. But the others pressed forward. Their armor reflected the attacks, slicing through bark and branch with blades that shimmered like broken glass. One raised a sonic staff, and a blast of sound hit Lilura like a wave, throwing her back. Moss flew into the air. Her head rang. Nolan charged forward, firing into the chest plate of a cleanser. The shot glanced off, too strong. But a second blast to the leg sent the soldier stumbling. Then lilura rose again. No longer afraid. No longer hiding. Her voice rang out a new song, not of defense but of reckoning. It was low and old, a melody not meant to soothe but to break. The forest howled with her. The sky darkened. Roots surged from the earth, not in gentle spirals but in jagged spikes. They pierced armor, snapped bone. The ground itself shifted, dragging enemies into pits lined with teeth like stone. But the high cleanser remained. Taller than the rest. With a helm forged from royal crystal, his voice boomed across the battlefield. "You are not wildblood," he shouted. "You are corruption, a lie." Lilura stepped forward, her skin cracked with glowing veins, her hair alive with living vine. "I am everything you tried to bury," she said. He raised his weapon, a long spear forged from the root of selvaris's oldest tree, corrupted and frozen into death. Nolan aimed his blaster. "No," lilura said. "This is mine." They clashed in a burst of green and white light, spear against root, order against truth. He struck hard, but lilura moved with the wind, dodging, singing, channeling. The forest fed her. Every blow he landed sparked more power in her veins. Then his blade grazed her side. She staggered. He raised the spear to finish her, but the ship behind them roared. Powered by the wildblood shard, it surged forward, its engines pulsing with ancient rhythm. Vines lashed from its undercarriage, wrapping the cleanser's legs, holding him still. Lilura rose, her hand on her wound, blood dripping down her side. She whispered the final word of the song. And the earth answered. The ground split beneath the high cleanser. Not fire, not death, but roots, thousands of them. They didn't destroy him, they bound him, pulled him downward, away from sky, away from light. They did not kill him, they erased him. When the last of the cleansers fell, silence returned to the forest. Nolan rushed to her, catching her before she collapsed. "You're bleeding." "I've bled my whole life," she whispered. This time, it meant something. He helped her toward the ship. It was ready. The engines glowed. The vines released their hold. As the ship lifted off. The forest did not cry out in sorrow. Humed. A farewell. A blessing. And above them, the stars opened. But far below, in the heart of Selvaris, the High Council watched their maps fall silent. And for the first time in centuries, fear touched their perfect crystal halls. She had survived, and she was no longer alone. T breathed. Outside the ship's curved window, the stars shimmered like quiet fire, and Lilura watched them in awe, her cheek pressed against the cool glass. The pain in her side had dulled, but her heart still beat loud. Not from fear, not anymore. It was something else. Something she had never truly felt in her bones until now. Freedom. Nolan sat across from her at the helm, fingers moving over glowing panels, his face lit by soft gold light. The ship hummed with a low, natural rhythm, wildblood roots pulsing beneath the floor, responding to Lilura's presence. It was not a vessel anymore. It was alive. It was part of her. He glanced at her and smiled. "You doing okay?" She nodded slowly. "I think I am." He turned back to the controls, adjusting their heading, setting course for the outer rings, a constellation of worlds beyond Selvarian reach. Forgotten by maps, untouched by law, they had escaped. But neither of them spoke about what came next. "Not yet." Lilura rose carefully, her legs unsteady. She wandered to the ship's center chamber, once sterile metal, now transformed. Vines curled around ceiling lights. Moss carpeted the floor in places. Pieces of bark, glowing crystals, and ancient carvings from the Heartroot Cave rested on the walls. She had remade it in her own image, wild, real, alive. As she walked past a patch of glowing ivy, it leaned toward her. It knew her. She touched one of the carved panels, fingers brushing over the image of a wildblood warrior standing between a burning forest and the stars. We were never meant to be erased, she whispered. Behind her, Nolan stepped in, carrying a thin device. He tapped it, and soft earth music began to play, slow notes, haunting and gentle. Found this on my old drive, he said. Wanted you to hear it. Lilura closed her eyes. The music wasn't perfect. It cracked and faded in places. But it felt like something ancient, something hers. She turned to face him. You never told me why you came to Selvaris, she said. Nolan scratched the back of his neck, sheepish. Honestly, I was chasing rumors. Thought there might be ancient tech buried beneath your forests, something powerful, something forgotten. He looked at her. I guess I found it. Her lips curved. I'm not a weapon. No, he said. You're a beginning. He stepped closer, slowly, giving her time. I fought in wars, he said. Watched cities fall. Watched people lie just to survive. And then I met you. And you didn't ask me to change. You just saw me. Her throat tightened. And you saw me, she whispered. No, he said, taking her hand, calloused fingers brushing her rough skin like it was precious. I see you. They stood there, two beings from different stars, holding on to each other in a living ship stitched together by love and defiance. And then the stars changed. A beep echoed from the control deck. Nolan rushed back. Check the scans. What is it? Lilura asked. He frowned. A signal, faint, old Selvaris code, but corrupted. She stepped beside him, reading the strange pulse. It wasn't a warning. It was a call. That symbol, she said, pointing. That's not council language. It's wildblood, old dialect. Nolan zoomed in. Coordinates. A planet. Habitable. Hidden inside a nebula that blocked most modern scans. He turned to her. Another refuge? Maybe more than that, she said. Heart pounding. Maybe others survived. Maybe they're waiting. They didn't speak another word. He set the course. The ship turned gently, guided by both machine and root. As they passed through stardust and shifting light, Lilura stood at the front window. Her skin still bore the patterns her people called cursed. Her scent still held the musk of earth and sap. But now, she loved it. It had saved her. It had made her legend. And when they reached the hidden planet, days later, what they found was beyond hope. Structures overgrown but intact. Songs carved into stone. Vines shaped like gates, and a figure. A woman. Tall, skin like deep soil, eyes gold as suns, waiting by the water. When she saw Lilura, she didn't run. She smiled. Others emerged behind her. Wildblood survivors, hidden for generations, waiting for a sign, for a voice, for someone brave enough to rise. They gathered around Lilura. They placed hands on her shoulders, her face, her chest. They sang her name in old tongue. Not outcast, not impure. Reborn. Nolan stood to the side, watching it all, eyes wide with wonder. When she turned to him, her voice trembled. I thought love was a lie made to control us. Me too, he said softly. But this, she whispered. This is real, he nodded. We write it now. Our own story. And so, on a world forgotten by stars, they built something new. Not a kingdom, not a rebellion, but a garden. They grew food, taught song, raised children with skin like bark and eyes like starlight. Their story spread, whispered across galaxies. Not of war, but of wild love, of the dirty, smelly alien girl who changed the meaning of beauty, of the human who stayed, and of the forest that finally sang again.